Hi, my name is Professor Bob Bowie, and I'm just going to introduce a little bit about the idea of teaching about truth in a complex world, but perhaps focus on some primary aspects, primary school aspects of that question. The question matters because we know that there are worries about the idea that children might be exposed to lots of things on social media that are presented to them as true and which we might have questions about. And very specifically, there are things that are shared on platforms like Instagram and TikTok that are created, that are fictitious, that are inventions, but are presented as real things. Some that are easier to spot, but increasingly more difficult ones to spot. And we also are aware, aren't we, that we live in a world where there are significant arguments about what's really going on, what really happened. And children might start to pick up on the news that even presidents, leaders of countries can make claims about things that they say have happened, which we might consider to be very different from the truth. And we also live in a world where there are different meaning-making systems, different worldviews, different religions that have a different overarching ways of bringing everything together. And then we have our school curriculum, which gives us a few subjects to develop. And those subjects sometimes approach the topic, a topic that actually requires more than one. It's commonly the case, for example, when children are learning to measure, that they're also developing or requiring their numeracy, just to utilise tools of measurement accurately. Maths and science are often combining with one another. But even subjects like geography, where we start to talk about concerns to do with sustainability, for example, and our moral responsibility in the world, bring in subjects like ethics and values and religious education. And so we start to use moral language, which brings about its own knowledge base in a subject that otherwise might have been looking at the observation of weather patterns. So some of these big questions that children have to think about and that we face in life require us to draw on these different subjects. So it's good to think about opportunities to make this more visible in our curriculum, so that students begin to see that there are these connections between their different subjects and begin to have an understanding perhaps that their subjects are also doing different kinds of things. One of the ways in which we found this interesting is around, for example, engaging with sacred texts and drawing on historical knowledge and knowledge from English or literacy into the classroom when looking at a text. The texts in the Bible are written at different times and by different human authors, and that's generally believed by the vast majority of churches and Christians. That's not an unusual or uncommon thing to think. So what children learn about the intention of the author in their English lesson can be relevant in their RE lesson when trying to make sense of, for example, what a gospel writer is trying to say when using a parable and explaining something, or what St. Paul may have been trying to say in one of his letters. Historical context and the historical understanding of sources can also be something of real value. Paul was writing to communities in the Roman Empire in Roman times, but the early Old Testament books of the Bible were in times of more ancient civilizations. So it's important to perhaps have maps available to make sense, and so we see the humanities are having to cooperate with one another. But the other thing to understand is, of course, that the subjects themselves are offering different kinds of ways of knowing. You've got a family of subjects that are developing what we might call a more propositional knowledge base, certainly mathematics and the natural sciences. And then we also have subjects that are developing more figurative understandings that are also extremely important for meaning. And we might think about history in this way, and English, but also the performing arts, and how sometimes it's easier to express something of our human experience of sorrow and sadness through drama or music or even art than it might be than it might be to use words. And this, of course, is particularly important with younger children who might not have developed literacy levels that help them to engage with those more sophisticated articulations of the emotions. So there are actually lots of opportunities to signpost the fact that different subjects are required in a cooperating way. This doesn't necessarily mean that we are going to abandon our subjects at all, because they offer different kinds of things. So that disciplinary knowledge base really matters. But maybe we can look at our curriculum and find opportunities where there could be richer cooperation around certain areas or topic areas where it might really matter. For example, where suddenly a lesson that's about describing factual information about weather change becomes a moral matter, and we might then need to use ethical language, the language of should and ought, and have some thinking about what that might mean and how we might be concerned about ourselves and others and the world around us. And there we have a more explicit example of perhaps the role of religious education and the dimension of moral education that often happens in RE in a subject matter like climate change and the challenge of living sustainably in the world. So giving students some awareness that there are these different kinds of meaning making that offer different sorts of things that all matter but in different ways might put them on a better footing. We know that by the time they're in secondary school, the experience of students can be that knowledge is very siloized, and they can have, and that actually can be quite difficult to draw knowledge from one subject and apply it well to another. This is a really challenging thing for students to be able to do. But I think primary schools have got a great opportunity because they have that breadth of awareness that hasn't yet been so entirely, if you like, separated out, that teachers are aware of the different subjects that they explore with pupils and might more easily see the possibility to show those connections. And really, I would like to encourage you to look for those opportunities, because I do think coming to understand that there is propositional knowledge, but there's also important information for making meaningful decisions and living a life of meaning is something that our education is surely there to do. And that there is a wonderful breadth of subjects that can help that become possible. But we might need to put in some thought around the best places to have that kind of cooperation. I hope this has been interesting and useful, and wish you well on the rest of your day. And again, I'm sorry I can't be with there today.